Hello and welcome to the subject of spatial teaching methods or language teaching methods. This is the topic, that is to say, how second language is acquired. There are some fundamental concepts in learning a second language in language teaching methods. What are they? Let's discuss. Meaning of acquisition. What is the meaning of acquisition? Number one, it refers to the act of acquiring something. Acquisition is the process of acquiring something, is the way of acquiring something, gaining something, receiving something, having something. Point number two, it is related to the cognitive process of acquiring a skill or knowledge. Look, acquisition is related to the cognitive process. Cognitive means understanding. Cognitive process means the way of understanding something. Cognitive process of acquiring means that the way you use your mind in understanding something, in acquiring something, like it may be a skill, it may be knowledge, that is known as acquisition. So acquisition also refers in the way you understand something, understand a skill, knowledge, and so on. Point number three, acquisition refers to the first stages of learning when a response is established. Look here, acquisition, it also refers to the first stages of learning. What are the first stages of learning? When a child is born and the child starts telling mama, papa, daddy, baba, like this, that is the point of time when a response is established in the first stage of learning something. And that first stage of learning something naturally is known as the art of and process of acquiring something, and that is acquisition. For instance, the child's acquisition of language is the first stage of acquiring knowledge in which response is established. Look, acquisition is basically the child's acquisition of language, that is to say, the first stage of acquiring knowledge. The first stage in your case of acquiring Arabic language, understanding Arabic language. And that is the time when your first response to the outside world is connected to that language of learning Arabic, acquiring Arabic. In fact, first language we never learn, we acquire. Next, point number five, knowledge gained through acquisition is not conscious. It's a very, very important point. Acquisition, when you get knowledge through acquisition, through acquiring something, through understanding naturally, it's not conscious, it's not deliberate, you don't make a sincere effort. It happens as you grow, as you natural things happen. Likewise is the acquisition process. So it's not conscious, it is the result of natural process of gaining something, like walking, sitting, and eating. Look, how did you know? How did you walk? Do you know how did you walk? Do you know how did you start sitting, eating, standing, talking? No. So acquisition is all about the natural process of gaining something, like the habit of walking, the habit of sitting, the habit of eating, and so on. You can see the tree, a small plant, it's growing, it does not know it's growing, it's a natural process. Likewise is acquisition of the first language, it happens naturally, we don't make a sincere effort, it's not a conscious process. Okay, so this is meaning of acquisition. We move on to the next, meaning of learning. Learning refers to knowledge or a skill acquired by instruction or study. Look, acquisition a natural process, but learning not natural process. You have to make certain effort. You have to acquire by instruction or study. You have to work hard. Like at the moment, you are trying to learn special teaching methods. So what you are doing? You are doing your best. You are putting your heart and mind to understand this lesson. So this is not conscious process. This is a deliberate attempt. You are not learning yourself. Naturally, you are making an effort. This is learning. So learning when you make an effort, acquiring when you don't make an effort. It happens naturally. Point number two, learning occurs when people take newfound information and incorporate it into their life. So learning occurs when you are motivated to know something more. You are motivated, you are inclined to get something more. You are interested in getting some information. And when you are interested in getting more information, then the learning starts. If you don't have motivation, if you don't have interest, learning will never take place. Point number three, learning is a part of education. Learning is a part of education. It is about personal development. It is about schooling and training. So learning is all about schooling and training. It is a part of education system, and we learn to improve ourselves. It helps in our personal development. Okay. Four, learning is generally goal oriented. Very, very important point. Learning has its goal. You have to make a goal in order to learn. You want to learn something. You want to learn about this topic, meaning of learning. So this is the goal at the moment. So learning is always goal oriented. It is aided by motivation, and motivation helps in reaching that goal through the process of learning. Number five, learning is often defined as a relatively lasting change in behavior that is the result of experience. Learning is very, very related to the experience. When you learn something, it also makes you feel a change in your behavior, a change that happens out of the result of your experience in learning something. Six, learning became a major focus of study in psychology during the early parts of the 20th century. Long back, the field of learning was not that much wider and broad, but at the moment in 20th century and the 21st century, learning has become an important focus of study in the field of psychology. How learning takes place, what are the various techniques, and so on. 7. Today, learning remains an important concept in numerous areas of psychology, including cognitive, educational, social, and developmental psychology. So, in modern time, learning has become an important part of psychology, and in various areas of psychology, that is cognitive, cognition, how to understand, in various educational, social, and developmental psychology. Okay. So we have, this is the concept of learning, that is to say, meaning of learning. Move on to the next. Language acquisition versus language learning means, what is the difference between language acquisition and language learning? So first we talk about language acquisition, and in the next slide we'll talk about language learning, and then you can combine and you can understand what is the difference. First, there is an important distinction made by linguists between language acquisition and language learning. Look, language acquisition and language learning. Language acquisition is a natural process. Like you learned your first language, you acquired your first language. Okay? Language learning is not a natural process. It is not a deliberate process. It's a conscious process. Okay? Go to the next. Children acquire language through a subconscious process during which they are unaware of grammatical rules. Look, language acquisition is gained through a subconscious process. You are not conscious, you don't know, you are not aware of, but you learn, you acquire. Like you started learning Arabic language. How did you start learning Arabic language? You don't know. You did not know grammar of Arabic, but you started speaking, started understanding. That is what we call language acquisition. This is similar to the way they acquire their first language. That is what I mean to say, is that language acquisition refers to the first language, acquiring of first language. They get a feel for what is and what isn't correct. Look, in the process of acquiring language, especially language acquisition, in this particular field and area, you have a feel what it is and what it is not, what is right and what is wrong. Like for example, when you started learning Arabic language, you had a feeling for Arabic language. You just acquired it naturally. And in the process of acquiring that language, you had to feel what is right, what is wrong. Nobody deliberately taught you, do like this and do not like this. It happened naturally. In order to acquire language, the learner needs a source of natural communication. So, in language acquisition, we have the natural source of communication, like when we started speaking Arabic language naturally. The emphasis is on the text of the communication and not on the form. So, the emphasis on the text of the communication means how we communicate. That is important in having first language, in acquiring first language, rather than we should talk about structures and the form and the grammar and so on and so forth. So when we started acquiring first language, in your case acquiring Arabic language, you did not know the form of the Arabic language, you did not know the structure of the Arabic language, you did not know the grammar of the Arabic language. Rather, you just understood the text, you understood the content of the communication. That is the point here. So language acquisition is all about acquiring naturally. It's a natural process. It's not a conscious process, it's a subconscious process. Okay, move on to the next. Language learning. Now language learning, we already talked about language acquisition. Now language learning. Okay, language learning on the other hand is not communicative. It's not communicative, it's not natural. It's not that when you started to learn a language, you just started speaking and communicating naturally. It is the result of direct instruction in the rules of language. You learn a language because of the instructions and the rules given to you to follow these steps in order to learn that particular language. In language learning, students have conscious knowledge of the new language and can talk about that knowledge. In the language learning, students make conscious effort, deliberate effort. You know what you are doing, what rules you are trying to learn, and for what purpose. And then you begin to know that language, begin to learn that language, begin to talk and communicate in that language. They can fill in the blanks on a grammar page. Like a teacher can give you a lot of exercises, a lot of ways to practice yourself in the subject of grammar. Why do we learn grammar? Because we want to learn a language. So learning grammar is the language learning because we make conscious effort, deliberate effort. Research has shown, however, that knowing grammar rules does not necessarily result in good speaking or writing. Look, we learn language, but it's not necessary that when you know grammar, you can learn a language very well. You started speaking Arabic. Did you learn first grammar of Arabic and then you started speaking? No. So the researcher says that in order to speak or write language, it's not necessary that you should be perfect in the field of grammar. Only then you can succeed. A student who has memorized the rules of the language may be able to succeed on a standardized test of English language, but may not be able to speak or write correctly unless practice in the context. Look, speaking is a different thing, writing is a different thing, writing is an art, speaking is an art, knowing grammar is a skill. If you know grammar, you may pass the test in the examinations, but it is not necessary that you will be able to speak and write naturally and effectively unless or until you practice writing yourself, you practice speaking in the context, in the situation. So language acquisition versus language learning. Keep in mind, language acquisition is a natural process. Language learning is a conscious process. It is subconscious, but it is conscious. We don't make deliberate effort in language acquisition, but in language learning, we make deliberate effort. In language acquisition, we are not aware of. In language learning, we are aware of all the steps, what to follow. And move on to the next. First language acquisition. First language acquisition is acquired in a natural setting, in a natural environment, like in a family setting. Observe a small child's speech development. First he listens, then he speaks. Understanding always precedes speaking. Look, how does a child speak? The child first listens, for 1 year and 2 years, and then he starts speaking mama, baba, papa, daddy, and so on. A small child listens and speaks, and no one would dream of making him read or write. So, when a child is born, the first 3 4 years, the child just listens and speaks, but nobody asks him to read and write. Reading and writing are advanced stages of language development. Okay, the natural order for first language learning is listening, speaking, reading, and writing. So, the natural order of learning a language is first the child listens, then the child speaks, then the child begins to read, and then he writes. How did you learn Arabic? First, you listened for 2 to 3 years when you were a kid, then you started speaking, then you started reading alphabets of Arabic, and then you started writing. You did not have to translate when you were small. When you started learning Arabic, nobody translated Arabic into Arabic. If you were able to learn your own language without translation, you should be able to learn a second language in the same way. So the process that you applied in acquiring your first language, that is to say Arabic language, if you follow the same process in learning second language, that learning becomes very natural. A small child simply uses language. He does not learn a formal grammar. So a child is not interested in learning grammar. A child wants the natural setting to acquire first language. You don't tell him about verbs and nouns, yet he learns language perfectly. Nobody taught you what is verb, what is adjective, what is ism, noun in Arabic, but you learned Arabic language. That is about first language acquisition. Move on to the next. Second language acquisition. In short form, SLA. S for second, L for language, A for acquisition. Refers to the subconscious or conscious process by which a language other than the mother tongue is learnt in a natural or a tutored setting. So second language acquisition is a subconscious process or rather conscious process, and it is not done in a natural but in a tutored setting, means all the arrangement and physical facilities are provided to learn a second language. It is about the study of how learners learn an additional language after they have acquired their mother tongue. So second language is about second language acquisition. It is about that you acquire after the mother tongue, that you should know the second language. Second language acquisition is a complex process. It is a complex process. It has a lot of theories and principles. It involves many related factors pertaining to the learner on the one hand and the learning situation on the other. It involves a lot of factors how second language acquisition takes place. Different learners in different situations learn L2, means second language, in different ways, and different learners in different situations have different stories how they learn second language. It covers the development of phonology, morphology, grammar, and syntax. And acquiring second language, rather I should say learning a second language, it involves a lot of areas of language, that is to say phonology, morphology, grammar, and syntax. Okay, now time to talk about questions. Explain briefly what is acquisition, learning, language acquisition, language learning, first language acquisition, second language acquisition. Talk about them briefly. Question number 2, write in detail about any one of the following topics. Write in detail about any one. You can choose first language acquisition or second language acquisition. Okay, and I hope that's all. Thank you and goodbye.